Hey folks, and welcome back to the Oklahoma State University Archives Live. My name is Olivia Turner, and this is a live of many firsts. It's our first live of the 2020 to 2021 school year, our first live back in person since February, and my first live as the digital archive storytelling intern ever. I'm here with a very familiar face with the Archives Live, David Peters, who is the head of archives at the OSU Libraries. David, how are you doing today?
Doing great. I'd like to welcome you to the Archives Live broadcast. So
Thank you. So a lot of our audience members may not know where we are, and they may be hearing this air vent blowing right above us. We are actually in the Library Auxiliary building, also known as the lab. David, could you tell us a little bit more about where we are?
So the lab was developed to store materials both from the main library and from the archives. It has the best environmental conditions for any of our materials on campus. So it has a temperature of about 50 degrees. It's a little chilly in here, and the relative humidity is about 35 to 40%. So those are very constant, and they're excellent environmental conditions for materials, both archival materials and for materials from the main library.
Awesome.
It was built about 5 years ago. Oh, I'm sorry, about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so how large is the lab?
So I believe the shelving is about 30 to 35 feet high.
Wow.
There are 12 bays. I think it was originally designed to hold about 1.2 million volumes, and so that's a lot of material. The numbers are a little bit skewed because archival collection is a little different stored than a book collection is, but gives you an idea of about 1.2 million items could be stored in here.
That's amazing. Is there room to grow from there?
Well, so it took about 2 years to build. So it took about 2 years to build the facility, and now 5 years out, it's going to take us probably another 4 or 5 years to fill it. So it's going to take much longer to fill it than it did to build it, just because of the sheer size.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There is an option. The footprint for where the building is. There's an option for a new addition to this building, and so they could double the size of this if they needed to in the future. But for right now, this is our main auxiliary for storing materials off campus. We have another area called the Library Annex, which is another facility we use to store materials. I think it has a capacity of about 500,000 items.
That is just amazing.
It's a lot of stuff.
That is amazing. So how does the archives select items to be brought to the lab?
So let me break that down into two groups again. So for the library, they're selecting materials that either have already been converted to digital, so there's a digital format available online for researchers. Or these are items that are second or third copies, and so we don't need to have multiple copies within the main library. And occasionally there are fragile materials that they'll bring over here just for safekeeping. For the archives, we're trying to find a stable environment, and so for some of our most significant and worthwhile collections, we're going to bring them over here because just for long-term storage, this is the best place for them. We also want to look at items that we may have digitized also, and so there's digital surrogates, copies of those available for people. But generally, we're moving things over here simply for the environmental conditions.
Awesome. Okay, that's really interesting. So can archived items or collections be brought out of the lab? And if they can, what's that process like?
So for the main library items, I think there's an online form that people can request materials to be returned to the main building from here if they need them. Or I think sometimes they can even make scans of items if they just want like a page or something. They can scan it over here and make that available to the main library. For the archives, what we do is for most of our collections, people have to request that material through the archive, our department, and so they can reach us either by email or by phone. They let us know which items or what part of a collection they're interested in. Sometimes they'll request a whole collection. They don't realize the whole collection may be 500 boxes. We're not going to haul 500 boxes, so what we do is we send them an inventory, and they can narrow down their search to maybe one or two items that are in several boxes. Then we retrieve those items and we bring them to the main library. They'll have to use them in our archive reference room on the second floor. So archival materials can't be checked out. But we have a pretty good turnaround on materials both from this building and from the annex being brought to the archives. We let them know, the patron know that the materials are here and that they're available for use. In the past we encouraged people to come in and use the library. Now we're trying to make more appointments rather than just people drop in, so we have the materials available for them.
Okay, interesting. And you had mentioned earlier how some items could be digitized, correct? Okay, so what is the process for archived items being digitized?
So we have kind of a series of steps we go through. First of all, if something has been very popular and we found a lot of use for that item, we figure, okay, to reduce wear and tear on that item, we're just going to digitize it and make it available to anybody who wants it any time. They don't have that way. They don't have to utilize that material more than it has. One of our goals is to try to preserve things for the long term. Well, the more you use something, the quicker it's going to wear out, and we try to avoid that. So if something is fragile, we might consider digitizing it. If something gets used a lot, we might consider digitizing it. And then we have a series of things that we think are kind of interesting, and we think once the public is aware of them, it would be much more beneficial to have them in a digitized format. So what we try to do is kind of prioritize what we can do, and then we work with digitization services in the library, and they really do the heavy lifting. And so we have to kind of collaborate with them on projects so that we can get into the pipeline and what can be done. But we can do digitizing in the archives, and for specific items, we can digitize individual items if an individual needs something. We can provide a digital copy of that. If it's, if they just absolutely have to have it, we can track it down and try to. The only exception to that is if something is very fragile and we're just unable to digitize it because it's going to possibly break the paper or the hinge. But otherwise, we can create digital surrogates. And if it's just a few items, there's no charge. If it's a lot of items, there may be charges involved.
Okay. It's really interesting that you kind of talked about the digitization process because, spoiler alert, I'm a college student, right? And so whenever I want to see an artifact or something like that, 99% of the time I'm going to find it online. And that's an efficient way to learn about history, but just, being in the lab, that's just a completely different experience. Just being physically surrounded by hundreds of thousands of, pieces of archived content. It's something I still struggle to explain just how awesome it is. This is my third time being in here and I still struggle to talk about that. But it's just amazing, and that's my hot take. But what I want to know is what our viewers are thinking right now. So if you guys have any questions, any comments about the lab, about archives, about OSU in general, feel free to comment during this live stream. We definitely want to hear what you have to say. And while you do that, I was actually given the opportunity to come visit the lab last week and kind of take a little bit more of a deep dive around it. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that today, so I was able to do that last week. So you're gonna come with me and we're gonna go down one of the aisles and see if we can find a collection or something to look at. Hey folks, you're here with me in the Library Auxiliaries building taking a look at all of the material that it has to offer. The lab is currently holding about 570,000 pieces of archived content, but that doesn't mean there's not room to grow. The lab is actually set to hold about 1.5 million materials, and if need be, there's still room to grow from there. We're going to take a look at some of the collections that it has here and just kind of see what we have in the lab, what there is with it. So one of the coolest parts about being in the lab, to me, is that there are items from a couple of years ago sitting right next to items from the 1880s. But it's not like that on accident. Everything here has its place. So we're looking at a collection right now. This collection is in a box, which is attached to a shelf, which is attached to a ladder, which is then attached to an aisle like this. So whenever you see a box, you'll see the box number, the shelf number, the ladder number, and the aisle number along with the letter. You'll see the letter L or the letter R, meaning the item is on the left aisle or it's on the right aisle. So you'll see the box number, the shelf number, the ladder number, the aisle number, and the letter in which the aisle is in. So we're taking a look here at the David Oberhelman collection. The David Oberhelman collection actually has its own gallery on the second floor mezzanine of the Edmund Lowe Library for anyone who is in the Stillwater area and wants to check it out. So we're going to go ahead and look in this box right here. And as we can see, it looks like there's a couple DVDs and book sets in it, which I think is pretty cool. So if anybody has any questions during this live stream or about this segment, feel free to comment during the live stream. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Go Pokes! Okay, so I was not the smartest whenever I visited the lab last week because I was in a short sleeve shirt. And like David said, it's about 50 degrees in here with about 35% humidity, and that makes for a 100% cold Olivia. I dressed a little bit better today. Was not smart with the open-toed shoes, but enough about that. We have more questions to go through. So we're going to take a look and we're going to ask one question that a viewer has asked, and this is from William. William wants to know, are there any items in the lab that you find particularly interesting?
Well, there's a number of items in the lab that I find particularly interesting. We have a bunch of objects, including art and drawings, which I find kind of fascinating, because that's, in the archives world, normally deal with paper and photographs and documents, and not three-dimensional items and art. And so I really appreciate some of the art we've been able to collect recently, and the donors who provided that. And so we're in the beginning processes of developing all of that and creating inventories and getting those processed. But some of the art objects I really enjoy.
So what does the development of the lab mean to the university?
So initially, the initial reason for it was to clear materials out of the main library. You have to think the library had become really a warehouse, a storehouse of books, which is good. I mean, that's what a library is. But there was no room for patrons to be in there anymore. And we really were beginning a strong emphasis not only to share library resources throughout the campus and really throughout the state through online activities, but also providing spaces, more collaborative spaces within the library itself. And so with the rooms we set up, the study rooms and the resources with computers, we needed more space in the building. And so by having the lab, it's provided us an opportunity to move a lot of materials that weren't being used very frequently out to provide more creative spaces within the library itself. And see, for those of us who work in the libraries and archives world, we think that is critical to the whole university experience. And so we really want to be a place where researchers, students, graduate students, faculty and staff can come collaborate and do their research. Of course, with COVID-19, that's created some new challenges, but I think we're adapting to those and trying to make adjustments so people can still be involved with those kind of activities just with social distancing and masks and those kinds of things. So.
Absolutely. So Bondi wants to know, how long will it take the lab to reach capacity?
So I'm estimating, based on how much material they moved in the last 5 years, we're probably looking at another 4 or 5 years of moving material over here for it to be at capacity. And by that point, we would have cleared out quite a bit of material from the main library. So I think it'll probably be within the next several years. The administration will probably begin an evaluation process, determining what kind of spaces are we needing, because libraries will continue to change in the kinds of services they provide in the future. And so in a few years, that'll give us some time to reevaluate, look at our space utilization, and then determine whether we need to move additional material out to the lab or create a second lab. But we've got some time.
Bonnie also wants to know, you mentioned that it's cool with steady humidity for archival reasons, but why exactly are these ideal conditions?
So in the archives world, most of our materials are paper, and paper is really kind of like a sponge. You use paper towels, you use napkins, so paper will absorb moisture, and not just moisture like water on a tabletop, but it'll absorb moisture out of the air. And the more moisture paper absorbs, of course, the more it expands. Well, when you have millions of pages of material absorbing moisture and fluctuations, being hot, being dry, and then being wet, those changes are really difficult on the materials themselves. Plus, moisture provides a perfect environment for mold, and the last thing you want to have is mold and mildew in a library or an archive. And so if you can control the humidity, control these changes in humidity, that's a stable environment for paper. So it's the best environment we can have.
So who has access to the lab?
So there's a crew that work here on a permanent basis, transitioning materials from the main library. So they're here all the time. When materials are brought over here, especially from the main building, they're cleaned, and so there's no dust or possible mold spores and those kinds of things, but they're cleaned, they're arranged by size and boxed. So there's a full-time crew working over here, getting things into the system, because once you would locate an item in a box on a shelf, and if you put that item in the wrong box, the chances of you finding it are slim. And so they have an organizational system here that they work with, and so they get the materials into the right location so they can find them again. For those of us in the archives world, we have a crew that come to the annex. We work with the staff that are here and identify the materials that are needed, and then this crew will take it to the main library, and they've been very helpful in transitioning materials back and forth for us. So that's mostly who has. I don't get over here very much, but it's a very limited access to this location.
Yeah, I was mentioning I had only been here about 3 times, and it's all been in with the span of the past week. So before this is my first year ever being in the lab. So they do a very, very good job at keeping it pretty low level and making sure that everything here is really safe and protected. So I think that's really, really cool. So what is the largest collection in the lab?
So as near as I can determine, the largest collection is our OSU theses and dissertations. So this includes theses, I think, beginning in the 19-teens sometime, with the first thesis that was done here, all the way through about 25, year 2005 or 2006, when they went to digital theses and dissertations. So it's the whole range of research by our graduate students for almost a 100-year time period. It's in 3,900 containers, and there's 24,000 items. So I think that's our largest collection.
Oh my goodness, that is impressive. That is really impressive. Okay, so what would your piece of advice be to anyone who is first stumbling upon OSU's archived content?
So, the material they see that's available online, because we have a series of digital collections both from the archives and other units within the library, including oral histories and the map room, but they'll see digital collections that they can access online. So I'd encourage them to go there first, but they need to realize that those digital collections only represent, in our case, less than 5% of the material we have. And so if they get kind of a taste of something, they need to contact us if possible, because hopefully we can lead them with additional resources that aren't available online. And so first of all, I have them explore the archives website and look at some of the collections that we're featuring. look at some of the digital collections that we've provided online, and then reach out to us because oftentimes we'll know of additional resources that might be related to their research. And I'd encourage anyone to do that working with an archive, wherever that is, to reach out to those individuals because they work with those materials on a regular basis. And so much of our stuff is an analog. It's still the original paper and CDs and whatever it is. Archivists can help them find the material they need.
Okay, awesome. David, you have been so awesome in kind of helping us get to know the lab a little bit more, especially helping me get to know the lab a little bit more. Is there anything you want to include before we sign off?
Just that we have over 1,800 collections in the archives, and many people have heard me before, I've told them this, but if you put that on a shelf, it would stretch for 6.2 miles. So that's a lot of stuff, and only a small fraction of that has been converted to digital. And so I want always people to be mindful of the fact there's a lot of material in the archive that hasn't been digitized, but we're glad we're happy to work with people to help them try to narrow down and figure out what research materials they need so they can accomplish whatever their goals are.
It has been so cool to learn about the hidden gem that is archive content, especially here in the lab. If you want to learn more information about any archive content that Oklahoma State has, we encourage you to visit archives.library.okstate.edu. If you have any comments or questions that you want to send us, feel free to DM us at Oklahoma State University Archives Facebook. David, thank you so much for meeting with me today, and thank you to our audience for watching us. I hope I didn't do too bad for my first Archives Live. As always, go Pokes!